Hello and welcome back to Down to Earth, everybody. Melissa and I are excited to have you joining us to hear another exciting story from Uncle Marty.
Yeah, very much so. Welcome, Uncle Marty.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again with you.
Well, I've been talking to you a little bit over the last couple of weeks as we've kind of looked at the nuances of In Praxis, which is the organization that you head up. And I know that there's a lot of background story as well to just how the whole shift came from the GC overseeing a lot of this house church movement to In Praxis taking a lot of that over. And I know you were sharing a little bit about how, as you're looking back, some of these groups that were pre-existing have fallen through the cracks. And I was wondering if maybe you'd be willing to share with our audience a little bit just about that today.
Well, I would. It'd be a pleasure. A lot of the groups, some of them came, they came one by one, and as more and more came, then we realized that some had fallen through the cracks, and some we didn't even know about, because none of them were all just under one entity. So some were under a mixture between a local field and our office, some were under local divisions, unions, fields, under private individuals, other groups like AFM and so forth. And so we went looking for some of these. And many of these we found one time in 2011. We were traveling. I was actually in Kenya. We were running an MA program there. And an old classmate of mine, he was actually doing a doctorate on campus and on one of these off-campus programs. And as we were talking together, we were just sharing what had happened over the years since we had both been classmates studying theology together. And he said, well, I had been the conference president for a minority group of Adventists in a predominantly Muslim country, but while I was there, I was able to start an underground house church movement.
Wow.
And I bet your ears perked up right about that.
Yeah, that was like,
wait.
wow, amazing. I didn't know you were involved in this. And so he started sharing, and I got really excited about this. And I says, well, we need to find those people to see if there's anything there still. And he says, well, after I left, there was funding changes, and I don't think there's funding anymore, so I don't even know what has happened to them. But I said, do you happen to have any phone numbers, emails? He says, I don't have on me. Well, he finally called someone who knew someone who got a phone number.
You decided to take on the detective role.
We did. It probably in the end took us about 18 months, almost 2 years. But then we finally tracked down the person. We tracked down a phone number. I had a regional director in the area, and I says, why don't you go to his country and find him? And so this is, even though it's the regional director over numerous countries, it took him a while. He finally goes to that country, goes tracking down the person, and wow, he's so excited to find this person. He actually still had, I guess, about 3 house churches functioning.
Oh, wow.
And he was excited. Today he has a whole group of house churches. And in this country, while it's Muslim, there's several Muslim people groups. This is a very, very closed country, and at the same time, it's a very, very closed people group, this particular group. There's very few believers. They span their people group probably 7 to 9 countries where it's kind of spread out across. And it's just amazing to hear the stories of what God is doing through their work.
So real quick, when you say closed people group, they've kind of isolated themselves. They don't want to interact with other cultures? Or
exactly. They're already within the Muslim community where they live, they're even more closed than the normal people in the country.
Okay.
Let's say the predominant people group.
Okay.
They're a minority people group. They actually tend to be known as very fierce, warsome people. And so people kind of fear them. And so they're not easy to approach for other people groups, because other people groups are afraid of them because they have been hired as militias by different countries. Many of these people, there's a large part of them involved with Al-Qaeda type organizations. And so this particular tribal group, they're not like a tribal like you think in the middle of the Amazon or something, but they're a very distinct people group and very feared in the region where they live.
Well, and anytime you have a people group that has a core value to them, it sounds like this people group does, they tend to become more isolated and closed and want to protect their kids and want to protect every part of their society. And so that, I don't know, for me, when I see think closed people group. I think of it a little bit more like
this
that
is,
too.
This is very true. So it was just amazing how he first came to faith, how God prepared him to work for his own people, because first he had been extracted from his people. He became a part of a minority church in the country. And then my previous boss went very, very early on when he worked for the GC, went to train in his country. And he happened to be in that training. But it wasn't quite the right time, but he held very dear in his heart. I wish the church would release me to go and do this and support me so I could be a minister to my own people. He held that in, and when my friend who came, who was from Brazilian background, he came and met the person. He had heard about, underground house churches for Muslims. He should leave being a part of the organized church of a minority people because it's just impossible for them to reach. And when he realized that he was from this much more closed people group, he said, why don't you return to them and start trying to start a house church movement among them? So this is what he did. And soon after this had happened, he moved to another country where he was working and basically little by little lost contact with him. So it was just really exciting to make contact, to see that he hadn't lost faith, that in fact he had continued to share his faith. All his family were faithful believers, and he had started a small network of followers of Jesus when we found him. And today he has quite a large network. He works not only for his own people group, but he has found others as well. There's been a lot of migrants and refugees who have come into their country. He has worked with them. Right now, his country is in extreme famine. And the last communication we had with him is saying, please pray. Even my own home they had two things happen. They first had horrible flooding, and then all the water came, and then it just stopped, and it came at the wrong time. And so there's famine in lots of parts in the country where this extreme weather that happened. First, this horrible flooding, and when the rains weren't supposed to come, and then no rains at all. And so he actually lost his house with horrible flooding. And he was questioning, well, Lord, why did I lose my home? Well, as he lost his home, he went and lived with thousands of other people that lost their homes in kind of a makeshift refugee camp. It's an IDP, internally displaced persons. And there in that place, he was able to bring the hope of Jesus, as many people were questioning what has happened to us. Why have these natural disasters hit our country? First too much rain, then severe drought. What has caused all this? And so he has shared that as people, as thought leaders are thinking, and their religious leaders, they're saying, you know what, we weren't living to the light we had. And I'm not saying that's the reason, but that's how they interpreted
it.
They interpret it, and they're saying, you know what, we had become very secularized. We weren't praying the way we should. We weren't really worshiping for the right reasons. We were either worshiping out of fear of judgment, out of want of reward, but not out of really true submission. And so this general feeling, due to these chaos that has happened in their country, he has just said, wow, God has used all this because now people are very receptive to hear the gospel story. And it's just opened up avenues I would have never expected. And even though my family and I had gone from a decent home in our country, and now we're living in refugee-style accommodation, it's just really opened a door for us. So we've just seen these things happen as he's one story of many people we've been able to track down and find. And it's just been exciting to see how God has led us to find these people, because we had no idea.
And one of the things that kind of struck me, probably more towards the beginning of your story too, Uncle Marty, is a lesson that I have to be taught over and over and over and over again. That you never know what God's going to be able to use for good.
Absolutely.
And I know that it hurt you, it hurt other coworkers, it hurt other people who had been involved in house churches when you, looking back, realized during transition things, some groups fell through the cracks and you weren't able to pick them up as you had originally thought. And so then you ask those questions, well, God, what happens to the seeds that were planted? Did we make a difference? Did we make the right choice? You always end up asking, at least I always end up asking myself those questions, why? Or was I really listening to God? Like, just those kinds of questions. And when you hear a story like this, it reminds you that, number one, you never know what seed that was planted God's going to continue to use. And number two, just going back to the part about the refugee camp, sometimes God doesn't make bad things happen, but sometimes when bad things happen, God uses it ultimately for His glory in ways that we could never imagine.
It's true, and I've seen this happen in another country, Somalia. I've traveled through areas of there when there was extreme drought, and the people were coming to the same conclusion. Before the drought hit Somalia, the extreme drought about 10, 15 years ago now, and it's still going on. It's a little bit better. It's just not in the news anymore. I've been there. It used to be the most beautiful savanna. I mean, lush lands. And
yeah, I've seen pictures.
A group of people that we work with in the country, they had something like 70,000 head of cattle. And due to the famine, 69,000 head of cattle died. And it's just gone. And you just see now nothing but horrible Sahara Desert that used to be savanna. Beautiful, lush prairie lands. And it's just gone. And you just see bones of animals just everywhere spread out across the desert. And it's just like, why God? And as I talk to people, maybe I shared this in a previous episode, that the people came to the same conclusion. We had become very proud. I have 70,000 head of cattle. On the open market, that's $800 to $1,000 a head of cattle. That puts a family into a very wealthy position. And they said we had forgotten about the God, the Maker, who gave us this great abundance. And as we became proud and arrogant and forgot about God, the same God who gave us that extreme wealth took it from us. And so now they're open and willing again to return to that God.
Well, it's beautiful that they have that perspective to be interested, to search for an answer, to search for God. So I think a lot of us in the Western culture, when something bad happens to us, we're like, throw our hands up in frustration and say, well, forget God, He's no good, So that's encouraging to hear that they're turning to God instead of turning away from Him in those circumstances.
It's true. So it's kind of our dream to try to find more of these. There's still, as I was saying, probably 8 to 10 groups that we have heard about, people have told us. Someone said, one of our workers when we used to work, he went into a closed country, he baptized an imam. He was working with, I think it was an AFM couple there, and soon after that happened, then they left the country. What has happened with him? My boss, he had gone to a certain country as well, and there was a group of maybe 450 believers in a house church movement. And he went on the other side of the country, and there was another group of 200.
Oh, wow.
And we've lost contact with him. There was another in the same country, a lay person, and he ran a pretty significant ministry. We don't know what has happened to all these. And I can go country after country of groups like this, smaller groups that have fallen through the cracks, and we just really would like to find them, follow up with them, just as we did with this one, as I shared the story about.
Well, and it helps not just for you, for us who want to know what has happened to these groups, but it also helps with community, because when you're somebody who's following God and are in a situation where you feel like you're the only one, it's me and my family, we're the only people who know about God, we're the only ones who know who Jesus is, say in a predominantly Muslim country, and we're trying to share our faith, but it's a struggle, and it's just my, immediate family, which there may be 30 or 40 people, whatever, but I'm struggling, and all of a sudden someone like you pops up and says, hey, you're not alone. There's a community of fellow believers out there who want to at least support you in prayer, or who want to be there for you. We want you to know you're not alone. There's other people in the struggle. Even if you never have contact with that person again, at least in my mind, that would give me such comfort, because I would know, hey, I'm not the only one. There's other people out there.
Yeah, that's so true. And in Muslims, they have this deep sense of community, much more than we do. And to know that they're part of a larger community, that there's believers struggling like they are, it just makes a whole lot of sense. It was like we had an experience when I used to work for what used to be known as the Middle East Union. A lot of our believers had moved into Congo from South Sudan, into a whole string of countries below South Sudan. And so one time, the division Adventist mission coordinator and ministerial director, Peter Ronfeld, and with some of our team, I wasn't present with this, they went walking for days to try to find a group of our Adventist South Sudanese who had fled into the Congo. And as they were trekking through the jungle, they came across these villages. And these villages were Adventist villages. And they're like taken back. They can't believe it. The local villagers can't believe it. They had been separated from other Adventist believers for over 45 years.
Wow.
And you can imagine, they say, the joy they shared, that they had been connected with other Adventists, with an Adventist church leader like Peter, and they just were crying. It was just like happy as a day. They just said, we know why you came to find us. God used the South Sudanese, but we needed to know that there were still Adventists existing. And it was just a happy day, so they spent a week, even though it wasn't our territory, stayed there with them and preached with them and had this whole revival meetings, and they were just so excited to know what was happening with other believers around the world as well. It was just really exciting.
Oh, that just gives me the warm and fuzzies. Makes me very
That's
happy.
really neat.
Yes, yes.
So one thing that keeps coming up, Uncle Marty, throughout this season is house churches. And maybe you could take a moment and kind of explain to us a little more kind of what that looks like and what that is.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Caleb. As we have talked many times, we first saw that in the context of high security situations that we needed to move to a house church. It's against the law to have physical brick and mortar churches, but as it started growing, we have gone through several phases, you might say, of just doing like a mini church in a house. And we found that that was too formal and wasn't very easy to replicate. And then we learned that it was a lot easier to do something like we do in our simple church that we have been doing. You know, you share highs and lows, you read a passage of the Bible. So as you ask key questions about it, what is it telling me about God? What is it telling me about myself? Is there anything I can apply for this week?
Or like an inductive Bible study, I guess you'd
It's
say?
an inductive Bible study, and it's amazing. We just see people get glued to the Bible and start working through it, especially in areas where the Bible hasn't been accessible before, where people don't know a lot about the Bible. Then we started seeing, hey, this isn't good just for overseas situations. This is a very easy way to expand in big megacities where the prices have skyrocketed. And it becomes easy to replicate. Then we really wanted to go back and see, what did church mean originally? Where did they take this word from? The ancient word for church is ecclesia. So as you do a word study, where did it come from? It came from the original Greek cities, like in Athens and the other free cities. And ecclesia meant the free landholders in the city. These are the people who are the freemen who take the decisions and their sons. These are called the ecclesia. So as the Roman Empire expands, they adopt into their political structure this word ecclesia. So as they go from being a republic to being an empire, they now use this word. So now they come to Judea, for example. And so as they take over a province, they call together at the province and at the city levels the key movers and shakers. So together with local elections and prominent people and with outside help, then they decide who will be the ecclesia, the ruling class, and who make the decisions, because the Romans had a semi-democratic system. You had to pay tax to the empire, but a local city, a local province had quite a bit of autonomy that they would give to people to make their decisions. And the people who sat on those councils were called the ecclesia.
I learn new things every day. Keep going.
So when you see in the New Testament, they form these ecclesias of rich and poor together, this is groundbreaking. And if we put everything in context, the New Testament says Jesus is king. We see he's talking about kingdom. And they use these words of evangelion. Evangelion is the meaning of good news, but not just any good news. It's when the king comes to power. It's when his son has been born.
It's a grand event.
It's a grand
There's
event.
only a handful of
There's
them.
only a handful in your lifetime of good news that happen. And as we talked here before, Jesus says, I've come to declare good news. This is a very powerful thing. It's one of these big major events that happen 3, 4, 5 times in your lifetime. And then this even goes further. Now you're invited to be a part of the ecclesia of this kingdom of God. And these ecclesias meet in the homes. So as you read through the New Testament, it's very interesting. It says the ecclesia in the province of Asia Minor, or the ecclesia that meets in the home of so-and-so. So it's all about the people. And it has a connotation of free people, people who make choices. And it's people who come, and it just hit me this week as I was thinking about it, thinking of what the original ecclesia, they are planning, strategically planning for their city and making laws for their town. So there's a whole new application if you think, what was the purpose, the original purpose of Christ? As his kingdom believers, as his citizens come together in ecclesia, what was ecclesia for? It was for the benefit and the upbuilding of the kingdom. And I think that turns upside down many times what we think church is all about. What are we going to see if we have plans for these big mega cities? A big part of that ecclesia is taking this new understanding of really planning, how can we turn upside down our city? How can we plan for it? It's kingdom strategy. How do we take back the kingdom of darkness and make it a part of the kingdom of light, one person at a time? So this is how we then help people think, who are all the people in your network? And why we were saying in a previous episode of the mega cities, people that have 100 to 200 families in their sphere of influence. And then we make this chain effect happen. Because we transform what is the meaning of church.
So to expound on that a little bit, the Western understanding of church is we have a church leadership team. They do all that sort of planning, I guess. They would be the ones making decisions for the church community that would maybe spill out and affect the community, whereas the biblical or the first century definition of church or ecclesia would be people that they're all actively planning. Everybody in the group is a free person, and they're all there to strategize and help. How are we going to help our community?
Absolutely. Because every household is an ecclesia for God. And then you have ecclesia leaders. You might have group meetings that happen once a month where a bigger group gets together. But as we go back to the biblical basis, it happens in the oikos. That's the word used in Greek. And oikos is household. And households tended to be bigger than they are today. So you have a compound where mom and dad, uncles and aunties, your kids, your grandkids, servants, slaves, all are a part of this oikos. If you're like a feudal lord and you come to Christ, now your whole oikos, which means your whole network you bring to Christ. And there's stories of this happening. And due to this understanding of what was the ecclesia and how they came together, this is the real core of what happened. Why in less than 3 centuries, you go from a tiny movement in Jerusalem to spreading across the empire until within less than 3 centuries, 1/3 of the empire are followers of Jesus. Without a paid clergy, without a paid missionaries, you have people like Paul go around, and we'll talk a bit more of those dynamics, how it happens.
Well, there's ownership.
Everyone feels ownership. From your little level, everyone goes up and goes across. In a world where you have segregation between landlords, servants, in Christ you become one. And this is what James says. If he's a rich man, he's the same. Don't take the seat from the poor man and put the poor man on the floor. You're all one in Christ. And this was revolutionary. And as you read stories of the first 3 centuries of Christianity, it turns everything upside down. Everyone, there's just this whole social upheaval. And this is what much of the early persecution came from. It's not the doctrines they held. It was the outcome of their beliefs. That was an equalitarian society. A society built on no longer recognizing the emperor as emperor. You respected him, but he's not Lord. Your landlord, he realizes that he's an equal, and so he gives a whole lot more justice to the people. So we just see the society turned upside down. And one of these very core bases is the understanding of the role of the ecclesia.
Not to necessarily take you off topic, Uncle Marty, but through this season especially, you've talked some about Simple Church and you've talked some about House Church. I'm sure that there's members in our audience who are asking, what's the difference?
Yes, well, House Church or home fellowships or congregations, that's just synonyms for meetings that happen at home to worship God, to strategize, to how to share your faith better. Simple Church is a network of house churches that was first evolved right here in the North American Division. It was first under Florida Conference, then under the division, and then it grew a whole lot bigger way past the division until it's working in 25 or 30 countries. Right now, the director of it, Milton Adams, he's in Germany. the German Union asked him, would you please come and bring the network of house churches to Germany?
Wow.
So it's grown way beyond the North American division, and in that process, the division requested Simple Church came under the Impraxis network of house churches.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is house churches is pretty much everything we've talked about for the last 10 minutes.
Yes.
It spreads across various faith-based communities. It's all people wanting to see God. Simple Church in itself is an organization that is from our particular faith-based community to help guide those who are interested in doing house churches.
Exactly. There's training. You're part of a network. And a lot of training materials which are being updated constantly.
Comes in handy for someone, say, like me, who says, okay, well, maybe I want to step out and help start a house church for this niche of people in my community who won't come to a regular church, but I can reach them, and maybe then they can reach the people I can't reach. Simple Church is a good avenue to be able to teach myself how to be able to reach them.
And you will find a mentor who, if you have any questions, have this problem, you grab the phone and ask him, send a text message.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Uncle Marty.
Well, so as we're closing, I think I can see why it's so vital that you be able to connect with all these groups that have kind of fallen through the cracks over the years. Just to have that network and be able to have that support as you're growing and expanding, that seems really invaluable. Melissa, would you like to pray for all those groups
Happily.
so that we can find those people again?
Let's take a moment in prayer. Great God in heaven, we just come before you today with you on our hearts, particularly these 8 to 10 groups that Uncle Marty is specifically trying to find. Lord, you know where these people are. You know the journey that you have led them on. And I just ask that if it is your will, you allow Impraxis to reconnect with them and just wait eagerly and expectantly for the soon return and the second coming when we can all go home with you and live in eternity forever. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you guys again for joining us here on Down to Earth.